In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at 3 stories closely connected to the UK legal system issues we've previously discussed and explored in earlier videos, which now offer important new developments and updates. First, growing concerns about judicial complaints and whether judges are being properly held accountable. Second, the controversial decision to stop prisoner Jeremy Bamber from speaking to journalists and why critics say this threatens press freedom and the exposure of miscarriages of justice. And third, the latest developments in the Andrew Malkinson inquiry, where new convictions connected to the case could finally allow the inquiry to move forward. These stories may seem separate, but together they raise one important question. Who watches the justice system when the justice system gets it wrong?
Welcome to Spoken Injustice, where we put the criminal justice system in the dock. It feels incredibly good to finally say those words again and return to the place that for more than 3 years has felt like home, here with you. Before we dive into the heart of today's video, I hope you will allow me to share a few reflections and lessons I took away from our time away. It's been 2 months since we released our video announcing our break. A pause taken partly to reflect, partly to recharge, and partly because life has a funny way of humbling us when we least expect it. But somewhere in that time away, something happened. I grew. And by grew, I mean I actually went back to school. Yes, at this stage of life, with what I lovingly refer to as my post-menopause 2 brain cells, I completed a course at the London School of Economics on AI governance and ethics, and also managed to get good results. Honestly, that experience taught me 2 important things. First, we are never too old, too tired, too busy, or too hormonally confused to learn something new. And second, we are standing at the beginning of a world that's changing faster than most of us can process. Artificial intelligence will shape the future, whether we participate or not. So we need the courage to contribute to the conversation, to ask difficult questions, and to help build the kind of future we would want our children to inherit. Now, I'm humble enough to know that none of us alone is likely to change the world overnight. But history has always started with individuals willing to speak up, learn, connect, and begin something. Real change happens collectively. 1 voice becomes 2, 2 voices become thousands. And sometimes all it takes is 1 person willing to speak up to create the ripple that starts that real change. Spoken Injustice is proof of that. What began as my voice became mine and Barbara's voice, and today that voice is shared by almost 2,000 people who stand with us. So this return to YouTube, it's not just about coming back. It's about coming back with more curiosity, more purpose, and hopefully a little more wisdom. And probably still the occasional chaos. As part of our reflection on Spoken Injustice journey over the last 3 years, Barbara and I spent a lot of time talking to people, listening to feedback, and honestly reflecting on ourselves and the work we have been doing. We even invited AI into the conversation during this period of reflection, which surprisingly turned out to be enlightening. And after all that soul searching, we came to a surprisingly simple conclusion. What we are doing is actually okay, exactly as it is. In a world obsessed with the algorithms, viral moments, follower counts, and constant growth, it's easy to start questioning your value when the numbers don't explode overnight. But we realize that views and followers are not and were never meant to be our true measure of success. What matters to us is impact. What matters is that people who do follow us genuinely connect with what we create. That conversation are started, that perspectives are challenged, that someone somewhere feels seen, understood, informed, or inspired because of something we shared. And when we stepped back and looked at everything properly, we realized something else. We've built all of this with no funding, no big production team, no corporate backing, just passion, conviction, consistency, and I believe that these conversations matter. And you know what no funding and not corporate means? It means freedom. Freedom to say it as it is, with no strings attached. And that means a lot to us. That reminded us that meaningful work does not always arrive with loud applause or millions of views. Sometimes it grows quietly, steadily, through trust, and most importantly, authenticity. So we are coming back not with pressure to become something different, but with renewed confidence and commitment in continuing to be exactly who we are. More motivated now because we understand that even if the journey is slower than others, we are still on the right path. And to everyone who has supported Spoken Injustice over the past 3 years, thank you. You may never truly realize how much your encouragement has meant to us. Let's see where the next chapter takes us. And now let's get back to what we usually do best, talking about our criminal justice system, which unfortunately still seems to be sitting in our metaphorical dock. Let's start with public confidence, the very foundation upon which any justice system stands. What happens when serious concerns are raised about the conduct of judges, the suppression of media access, or catastrophic miscarriages of justice? Several recent developments have reignited debate about transparency and accountability in the legal system. Legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg has highlighted some changes to the judicial complaints procedure. Meanwhile, Jeremy Bamber has reportedly been banned from communicating with journalists from prison, a move many say may violate long-established legal principles protecting prisoners' rights to contact the press. And in the Andrew Malkinson scandal, one of the worst miscarriages of justice in modern British history, fresh convictions connected to the original case could finally allow a public inquiry to proceed, one that is absolutely needed. Let's unpack it all, starting with judicial complaints and judicial accountability. One of the least understood parts of the legal system is what happens when somebody complains about a judge. Most people assume there is some independent watchdog with serious powers, but many critics argue the reality is far murkier. We discussed this issue in this video. However, something may be changing for the better. According to legal commentator Joshua Rosenberg, reforms are widening the scope of judicial complaints procedures. And that matters because confidence in the courts increasingly depends on whether judges can be scrutinized properly. In short, the article explains that Judicial Conduct Investigations Office, the JCIO, which oversees complaints against judges in England and Wales, has agreed to reopen complaints against unemployment judge after admitting it had wrongly interpreted the law. The case was brought by 3 women who challenged the JCIO through judicial review after their complaints were dismissed. As a result, the JCIO has now widened the approach so that complaints about judges' conduct during case management hearing, previously considered outside its remit, can also be investigated. So let's see the background. For years, many complaints against judges have been dismissed on the basis that they relate to judicial decision-making rather than misconduct. In simple terms, if a judge behaves improperly in a courtroom, but it's tied to a judicial ruling, it can become incredibly difficult to challenge, creating a dangerous grey area. Now, nobody is arguing judges should face complaints simply because someone dislikes a ruling. Judicial independence is essential, and we have discussed that. If judges feared punishment every time they made an unpopular decision, the courts would collapse into political pressure and public intimidation. However, we've also said independence without accountability creates another danger. And this is where the debate becomes serious. We have argued that judicial culture can become defensive, protecting institutions instead of confronting mistakes. We have seen growing public concerns around disclosure failures, wrongful convictions, delays in appeal, and the handling of miscarriages of justice cases. And in some of those cases, some believe judges themselves escaped meaningful scrutiny. The reform Rosenberg discusses appear designed to broaden the kinds of complaints that can at least be considered. The development is being seen as an important shift for judicial accountability and public confidence in the justice system. But call me skeptic, but the key question remains, will these mechanisms have real teeth? Or are they simply procedural adjustments that leave the deeper culture untouched? There is also another issue here that rarely gets discussed. Public trust in the courts is no longer automatic. In the internet age, after scandals involving policing, government and public institutions, authority alone no longer guarantees confidence. Transparency matters more than ever. And that leads us directly into our second story. Because what happens when somebody inside prison claims they've been wrongly convicted and the state restricts their ability to speak publicly? You know what I'm talking about. Jeremy Bamber has spent more than 40 years in prison for the White House farm murders. He was convicted in 1986 of killing 5 members of his family. It remains one of Britain's most controversial murder cases. Bamber has always maintained his innocence. And over the years, journalists, campaigners, and some legal experts have continued raising concerns about aspects of the investigation and prosecution. The most vociferous being JBIC, the Jeremy Bamber Innocence campaign. As we discussed in this video, possible inconsistencies involving forensic evidence and alleged police misconduct have surfaced. However, reports have emerged that Bamber has been banned from communicating with the media from prison. His campaign group has told The Guardian he is no longer allowed to send letters to journalists, not receive them, nor is he allowed to talk to reporters by phone. He was last granted face-to-face interview with a journalist in 2010. Now, this is where the issue becomes much bigger than Jeremy Bamber himself. Because this is not simply about whether Bamber is guilty or innocent. It's about whether prisoners claiming miscarriages of justice have the right to communicate with journalists, something we discussed in greater detail in this video. Historically, media attention has played a huge role in exposing wrongful conviction. Without journalists, many miscarriages of justice would never have been uncovered, police misconduct might never have been exposed, and innocent people may never have been released. Think about cases like the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4, the post office scandal, and Andrew Malkinson. And more recently, similar concerns about scrutiny, accountability, and the role of the media have become especially prominent in discussions surrounding the Lucy Lebby case. As we know, public scrutiny is essential, and investigative journalism has played a crucial role in exposing miscarriages of justice. That's why this ban is deeply troubling. Because if the state can isolate controversial prisoners from journalists, then one of the few remaining avenues for challenging possible injustice becomes restricted. Supporters of the ban argue that authorities have obligations to victims' families and to maintaining confidence in the justice system. And for sure, this is very important. The families of victims often endure repeated media coverage for decades. Every documentary, every appeal, every podcast or campaign can reopen trauma. So we agree the tension is real. However, we must stress that democracies enter dangerous territory when governments or institutions begin deciding who is permitted to speak publicly about alleged injustice. What is striking here that the restriction has been justified not only as a way of protecting victims from distress, but also as necessary to preserve confidence in the justice system itself. Yet we would argue the opposite is true. Silencing those who claim to have suffered miscarriages of justice does not strengthen public faith in the system. Trust is built through transparency, scrutiny, and open debate, not through silence. Also, the timing of the ban only deepens those concerns. Recent reporting and podcasts have reignited public interest in unresolved questions surrounding the original White House farm investigation. Against that backdrop, the move to silence Bamber looks less like a sincere attempt to protect victims and more like institutional defensiveness, an effort to shut down uncomfortable scrutiny before it gathers momentum. And that perception is not without precedent. We have seen this pattern before in other miscarriages of justice. Institutions closing ranks, critics dismissed, difficult questions treated as threats rather than necessary challenges. Which brings us directly to Andrew Malkinson. Andrew Malkinson spent 17 years in prison for a rape he did not commit. Even after DNA evidence emerged, excluding him, he continued battling the system for years before his conviction was eventually overturned. His case became a devastating symbol of institutional failure. Police failure, disclosure failures, failures of the Criminal Cases Review Commission, failures across the entire justice system. All of these issues were effectively set aside pending the investigation and prosecution of the men now identified as the true perpetrator of the crime that cost Mr. Malkinson more than 2 decades of his life. Now that the trial has concluded and Paul Quinn has been convicted, we hope the inquiry can finally move forward, free from legal constraints, in the pursuit of the full truth. And this matters because the Malkinson case is not just about one wrongful conviction. It raises terrifying questions. Why did the system resist correcting obvious mistakes? Why were warnings ignored? Why did institutions appear more focused on protecting decisions than finding truth? One of the most disturbing themes of miscarriages of justice cases is what happens after doubts start emerging. Because sometimes the problem is not the original mistake. Sometimes the bigger problem is the refusal to admit that mistake. And that's the thread connecting all 3 stories today. Judicial accountability, press freedom, miscarriages of justice, they are all connected by the same underlying issue. Can powerful institutions truly investigate themselves honestly? Or do systems naturally become defensive when credibility is threatened? The Malkinson inquiry matters because it may finally force some of those questions into public view. And many campaigners hope it leads to structural reform. That means judges must be accountable, the press must remain free to investigate, and miscarriages of justice must be confronted openly rather than buried. The danger for any institution is believing that protecting its reputation is more important than pursuing the truth. And the biggest question remains unanswered. Is the system truly capable of correcting itself? Or does real accountability only happen when outside pressure forces it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think judicial accountability goes far enough? Should prisoners claiming innocence have unrestricted access to journalists? And what reforms would actually prevent future miscarriages of justice? If you found this video useful, then please like and share this video with anyone interested in justice and accountability. Also, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel to support our mission to humanize the criminal justice system. We are not asking for a perfect justice system. Perfection is impossible. We are asking for a system with the courage to recognize its mistakes, the honesty to admit them, and the integrity to put them right. Join us again as we sit and rise in this unique trial.